She didn't whisper it. She didn't lean in quietly. She said it clearly, loudly, confidently, like she was making a toast. The restaurant went silent in that uncomfortable way when strangers don't want to stare but absolutely are. My ex-husband, Daniel, didn't correct her. He didn't look shocked. He didn't even look embarrassed. He looked relieved. That was worse. The anniversary dinner had been his parents' idea. Let's keep things civil, they had said. We're family after all. We had been separated for 6 months. Not divorced yet, just separated. Daniel said he needed space. His mother said I was suffocating him. I worked 2 jobs while Daniel found himself. I paid the mortgage while he explored startup ideas that never left the notebook stage. I covered the insurance, the car payments and the utilities. But apparently I was the burden. The final straw, according to his mother, was when I stopped transferring money into his personal account after he moved out. You changed, she had told me once. You became cold. Cold. Because I stopped funding her son's indecision. That night at the restaurant, I felt my hands shake. But not from humiliation, from clarity. Because humiliation implies surprise. I wasn't surprised. I had seen this coming the moment Daniel packed a suitcase and said, Mom thinks we rushed into marriage. His mother had been whispering in his ear since the honeymoon. I wasn't ambitious enough. Then I was too ambitious. I wasn't supportive enough. Then I was controlling. The standards shifted weekly, but the narrative stayed the same. I was the obstacle. And now, in public, she was finalizing that narrative. You should thank her, she continued, gesturing toward me like I was a case study. If he had stayed, he would have wasted his potential. Daniel nodded faintly. That nod sealed it. Something inside me went very still. You're right, I said calmly. Her smile widened. She thought I was conceding. She thought I was breaking. She didn't realize I had just decided something permanent. I stood up slowly, picked up my purse, and walked toward the exit without another word. As I reached the door, my phone buzzed. I looked down at the screen. It was an email notification. Subject line, board vote confirmed. Acquisition approved. I froze, because 5 minutes earlier, I had just been publicly declared the mistake. And now, 5 minutes later, I was holding something that would flip the entire story. I stepped outside into the cool night air and opened the email with hands that were suddenly steady. The message was brief, formal, decisive. The board had voted unanimously. The acquisition was complete. My firm, Brooks Financial Recovery Group, Planning, officially purchased a controlling interest in Langford Tech Solutions. I stared at the company name for a long moment. Langford Tech Solutions was the startup Daniel had been working for since our separation. The company he swore was about to explode. The one his mother bragged about at every family gathering. The one she used as proof that leaving me had unlocked his brilliance. I leaned against the brick wall of the restaurant and let out a slow breath. The irony wasn't loud. It was surgical. 6 months ago, when Daniel told me he needed space, I didn't beg. I didn't scream. I didn't try to prove I was indispensable. I redirected my energy. I took the consulting firm I had quietly built on the side for years and expanded it aggressively. I specialized in corporate debt restructuring and undervalued acquisitions. I knew numbers. I knew leverage. I knew timing. And 3 weeks ago, when Langford Tech quietly started missing payroll projections, I noticed. When their cash flow reports became inconsistent, I noticed. When the founders quietly approached investors for emergency capital, I noticed. Daniel didn't. He was still pitching, marketing ideas while the financial floor beneath him cracked. I didn't pursue the acquisition for revenge. I pursued it because it was a smart investment. But tonight, standing outside that restaurant while his mother toasted his freedom, I understood something deeper. Narratives are fragile when they're built on ego. My phone buzzed again. Another email. Integration meeting scheduled Monday. Mandatory attendance for all department leads, including Daniel. I could have walked back inside. I could have announced it right there, between dessert and self-righteous applause. But power doesn't need to rush. I glanced through the restaurant window. His mother was still talking animatedly. Daniel was nodding along. They looked victorious. That was fine. I typed one short message to my operations director. Keep the announcement internal until Monday. Then I slipped my phone back into my purse and walked to my car. 5 minutes ago I had been labelled the mistake. 5 minutes later I owned the company my ex-husband depended on, and Monday morning the definition of best decision was about to change permanently. Monday arrived without drama, which made it more dangerous. There was no grand public reveal, no triumphant entrance, just a scheduled leadership meeting in Langford, Tech's main conference room at 9 sharp. I arrived 15 minutes early and stood quietly at the back of the room while department heads filtered in. No one paid me much attention at first. I had been introduced to a few of them during preliminary due diligence meetings. Daniel walked in at exactly 8:57 a.m, coffee in hand, talking animatedly to a colleague about an upcoming product launch. He didn't see me immediately. When he did, his expression flickered briefly. Surprise, then irritation. "What are you doing here?" he asked under his breath as he took his seat. "Working," I replied calmly. He rolled his eyes slightly and looked away. At 9 o'clock sharp, the interim CFO stood up and cleared his throat. "As you all know, Langford Tech has finalised an acquisition agreement effective immediately." The room stiffened. Murmurs started. The CFO continued. "The acquiring firm will now assume majority ownership and oversee financial restructuring." He paused and glanced toward me. "I'd like to introduce the new controlling partner." Every head turned. Daniel's shoulders went rigid before he even processed it. I stepped forward calmly. No dramatic pause. No smile, just clarity. "Good morning," I said evenly. "I'm Elena Brooks." The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was compressed. Daniel stared at me as if the air had thinned around him. His jaw tightened. His mother's voice from the restaurant replayed in my mind. "Leaving you was the best decision my son ever made." I continued. "Langford Tech has significant potential, but current liquidity issues require immediate restructuring. My team will be reviewing all departmental expenditures over the next week." I met Daniel's eyes briefly. "No roles are being eliminated today. Performance will determine future positioning." The words were professional, controlled, neutral. That made them sharper. Daniel finally found his voice. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "You can't just..." I held his gaze steadily. "The board already did." The CFO slid printed acquisition documents down the table, signatures, dates, authority transferred. The facts spoke louder than emotion ever could. Daniel's face drained of colour slowly. Not humiliation, realisation. For months, he had framed me as the obstacle, the weight, the limitation. Now he understood something he hadn't considered. I hadn't been holding him back. I had been stabilising him. And now, without that stabilisation, he was accountable to someone who knew exactly how his company functioned and where it didn't. I closed my folder calmly. "Let's begin," I said. And just like that, the story his mother had celebrated 5 minutes earlier began, rewriting itself. The meeting ended with controlled professionalism, but the tension lingered in the air like static. Daniel avoided looking at me as the department heads filtered out, their expressions a mixture of shock and calculation. A few gave me cautious nods. Others simply walked faster, as if distance might protect them from whatever restructuring meant. When the room emptied, Daniel remained seated, staring at the table. "You planned this," he said quietly. It wasn't an accusation. It was disbelief. "I evaluated it," I replied calmly. "There's a difference." He finally looked up at me. "You bought my company." His voice cracked slightly at the word "my." Ownership had always been symbolic to him. He never questioned where it came from. "No," I corrected gently. his temples. You could fire me. I could, I agreed. His breath caught. But I won't, he blinked. Why? Because this isn't revenge, I said evenly. It's business. That word. Again. Business. Structured. Impersonal. Stable. He stared at me like he was trying to find the resentment he expected to see. There wasn't any. What I felt wasn't anger. It was clarity. For years I had funded our household while he explored potential. I had balanced bills quietly while he pitched. Ideas that never left the whiteboard. When I stopped transferring money, he called me unsupportive. When I stopped being the safety net, his mother called me cold. Now the same people were staring at acquisition paperwork with my name at the top. My mother is going to lose her mind, he muttered. I allowed myself the smallest controlled smile. Your mother isn't part of the shareholder structure. He stood abruptly. She said leaving you was the best decision I ever made. I held his gaze without blinking. Was it? Silence pressed down on the room, because now that question wasn't rhetorical. It was measurable. His career security, his financial stability, his professional trajectory, all now intersected with the woman he had once framed as the mistake. I gathered my folder and turned toward the door. Integration meetings continue tomorrow at 8, I said. Be prepared. As I stepped into the hallway, I felt no triumph, no dramatic satisfaction, just alignment. 5 minutes after his mother declared me disposable, the foundation shifted. Not because I destroyed anything, but because I built something stronger. And strength doesn't need to shout. It simply takes control of the room. The fallout didn't explode the way Daniel probably expected it to. There were no screaming phone calls from his mother that afternoon. No public scenes. No dramatic confrontation in the lobby. Instead, there was silence. And silence can be far more destabilizing than anger. By late afternoon, my assistant informed me that Mrs. Langford, Daniel's mother, had requested a meeting. I considered declining, not out of fear, out of efficiency, but I agreed. 5 o'clock, 15 minutes. She arrived precisely on time, dressed impeccably as always, posture straight, chin lifted. Even walking into my office, she carried the confidence of someone who believed she still controlled the narrative. Eleanor, she began, not bothering with pleasantries. What exactly do you think you're doing? I gestured towards the chair across from my desk. Acquiring undervalued assets, I replied calmly. She didn't sit immediately. You humiliated my son. There it was. Not concern about the company, not curiosity about the financial structure. Image, always image. Your son works for a company that was failing, I said evenly. I stabilized it. Her eyes flashed. You did this because of what I said. I leaned back slightly. What you said revealed something. It didn't cause the acquisition. She studied me carefully, searching for bitterness. She wouldn't find it. You think this makes you powerful? She pressed. No, I said. It makes me responsible. That word unsettled her more than accusation would have. Responsibility implies maturity. It implies structure. It implies someone capable of holding authority without emotional chaos. She finally sat down. You could have walked away, she said more quietly now. You could have let him fail. I met her gaze directly. I don't operate out of spite. Silence settled over the room. Then why? She asked. That question held more weight than the earlier ones. Because I recognized inefficiency, I said calmly, and I don't ignore opportunity. She stared at me for a long moment. He thought leaving you would make him stronger. I didn't flinch. It did, I replied. That caught her off guard. How? It removed dependence, I said. For both of us. She leaned back slowly, processing. For years she had framed me as the limitation, the anchor, the one holding her son back. Now she was sitting in my office, understanding that what she labelled weakness had been stability. What happens to him now? She asked finally. He works, I said. He she stood to leave, she paused. I underestimated you. I gave a slight nod. Yes, no malice, no sarcasm, just fact. She left without another word. I sat there for a moment after the door closed, staring at the skyline beyond the glass. The power shift wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. 5 minutes after she declared leaving me the best decision her son ever made, she was sitting in my office asking about his future. That wasn't revenge. That was consequence. And consequence is always quieter than people expect. The next few weeks revealed something far more telling than any confrontation could. Daniel showed up early. He stayed late. He asked questions he should have asked a year ago. The swagger he once carried into meetings was gone, replaced by focus. Not humiliation, adjustment. I watched from a distance, reviewing performance reports without commentary. He knew I was evaluating him, but not emotionally. He asked, "Then you stay?" Simple, clean, objective. He nodded slowly. "And if I don't, then the company moves forward." Silence lingered between us. Not hostile, just honest. "You could ruin me," he said after a moment. I didn't react. "I won't," I replied calmly. "But I won't protect you either." That sentence carried more power than a threat ever could. He studied me carefully. "You're not angry," he said. "No, you should be." I leaned back slightly. Anger wastes focus. That seemed to unsettle him more than anything else. For months after our separation, he had framed me as bitter, as resentful, as holding him back. Now he was confronted with something far more destabilizing. Indifference. Not cold indifference, structured indifference. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "She shouldn't have said that," he muttered quietly. I didn't ask him to clarify. I didn't need to. She said what she believed, I replied evenly, and now she knows better. He nodded once and left. I turned back to the financial dashboard on my screen. Performance was trending upward. Integration was stabilizing. Operational costs were decreasing. The acquisition was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It wasn't fueled by revenge. It was fueled by discipline. That was the part no one expected. 5 minutes after his mother declared me disposable, the story had flipped. Not through drama, through structure. And structure, unlike pride, doesn't collapse under pressure. It recalibrates everything around it. The following month, the board convened for the first full post-acquisition review. Executives dialed in from 3 states. Quarterly projections projected onto the screen in sharp blue graphs. Daniel sat at the far end of the table, posture straight, eyes forward. Not defiant, not defeated, focused. That was new. When his department's performance slide appeared, I watched carefully. Revenue conversion was up. Campaign waste had dropped. He had cut 2 unnecessary vendor contracts and renegotiated one long-term supplier deal that previous leadership had let sit idle for years. "Improvement is measurable," the CFO stated calmly. That sentence alone shifted the energy in the room. Daniel glanced briefly in my direction, not seeking approval, but registering that the metrics spoke for themselves. After the meeting, several department heads approached him with legitimate questions, not cautious whispers. Respect was recalibrating in real time. That evening, I received a message from his mother. It wasn't sharp this time. It wasn't defensive. It was brief. "I see what you meant." I didn't respond immediately. 5 minutes later, another message followed. "He's better when he's accountable." That was the first honest observation she had offered in years. Accountability doesn't shrink someone, it clarifies them. I finally replied with one line. "Structure isn't punishment." There was no response after that, but there didn't need to be. A few days later, Daniel requested a private meeting. Not about job security, not about resentment, about growth. "I relied on comfort," he admitted, "on you handling the stability." I stayed quiet. He continued. "When you stopped, I had to face gaps I'd been avoiding." I nodded once. "Most people do. responsibility, he finished quietly. There it was, the real twist. Leaving me hadn't unlocked potential. It had removed the safety net that masked his inefficiency. You didn't ruin me, he said. You forced me to grow up. I didn't smile. I didn't soften it. I simply said, I didn't force anything. And that was true. I hadn't sabotaged him. I hadn't humiliated him publicly. I hadn't weaponized my position. I had simply stopped absorbing the consequences of his immaturity. The shift wasn't loud. It was disciplined. And discipline, unlike drama, sustains itself. As he stood to leave, he paused. She was wrong, he said quietly. I didn't ask who. I knew. Yes, I replied calmly. Not with triumph, not with resentment, just acknowledgement. Because 5 minutes after his mother declared, leaving me the best decision he ever made, the foundation beneath that belief had already started to crumble. And months later, the only thing standing was structure. The next time I saw his mother, it wasn't in a ballroom or a conference room. It was at a charity gala 6 months later, the same kind of polished event where image mattered more than substance. She approached me without the sharpness she once carried. No tight smile, no subtle superiority, just composure. You've handled this with restraint, she said quietly. That word lingered. Restraint. She had expected retaliation, public humiliation, some dramatic corporate revenge story she could explain away as bitterness. Instead, she got stability. She got metrics. She got discipline. I studied her expression carefully. There was no arrogance left in it, just recalibration. I don't operate emotionally in business, I replied evenly. She nodded slowly. I misjudged you. That admission wasn't loud, but it was direct. You judged me through him, I said calmly. Not through facts. She didn't argue. That silence was new. Later that evening, Daniel stood beside me during a networking conversation with investors. He introduced me clearly. This is Eleanor Brooks, majority partner of Rowe Logistics Group. No hesitation, no qualifiers, just fact. I didn't react outwardly, but internally I registered the shift. Respect doesn't announce itself, it stabilizes itself. During the closing speech, one of the investors referenced the Langford turnaround as a case study in disciplined leadership. Saw Daniel glance at me briefly, not resentful, not threatened, grateful. After the event ended, we stood outside under the city lights. I was wrong, he said quietly. I looked at him steadily. About what? About thinking leaving you meant growth. I didn't rush to respond. He continued. It removed the stability I didn't appreciate. I nodded once. Stability doesn't feel impressive, I said. Until it's gone. He exhaled slowly. She thought you were holding me back. I met his gaze calmly. She thought I was visible. That was the truth of it. Visibility makes insecure people uncomfortable. Competence without noise feels threatening to those who rely on narrative. But I hadn't destroyed anything. I had clarified it. And clarity doesn't scream, it stands. As we parted that night, there was no hostility left between us. No unresolved tension. Just recognition. The narrative had flipped not because I forced it to, but because it couldn't survive facts. And facts, unlike pride, don't bend under pressure. They align. Time did what it always does when ego is removed from the equation. It settled everything into proportion. The acquisition stabilized fully within a year. Profits were consistent. The board extended my leadership contract without debate. And Daniel, he became one of the strongest department heads in the company. Not because I shielded him, because I didn't. He learned to operate without the invisible support system he once took for granted. That shift didn't humiliate him, it strengthened him. One afternoon, he walked into my office with a proposal, not a request for reassurance, not a defensive argument. A strategic expansion plan backed by real data. I want to pilot this next quarter, he said. I reviewed the documents carefully. They were solid, risk-adjusted, conservative but scalable. Approve, I said. He blinked slightly, then nodded once. No celebration, just progress. months earlier, because now it was grounded in observation, not pride. One evening, I ran into Daniel at the office long after most employees had left. The city lights reflected off the glass walls, casting long shadows across the floor. "You know," he said quietly, 5 minutes after she said that at dinner, "I thought I'd won. I didn't react outwardly." He continued, "Now I realise that was the moment I lost leverage." I leaned against the doorway. "You didn't lose leverage," I said calmly. "You lost illusion." He nodded slowly. "That's worse." I gave the smallest hint of a smile. "It's more honest." He studied me for a moment. "You never needed to prove anything." "No," I replied. "I just needed to stop shrinking." That was the final truth of it. My mother once told me not to embarrass them. She thought visibility would destabilize their image. What destabilized it was denial. What rebuilt it was structure. 5 minutes after she declared leaving me the best decision her son ever made, the foundation began to shift. Not because I retaliated, because I stood still. And when you stand still long enough with clarity, the room adjusts. Years later, when I think back to that engagement dinner, I don't remember the volume of her voice. I remember the silence that followed it, the silence that revealed who was listening and who was calculating. I remember the moment my phone buzzed with the acquisition confirmation, and how strangely calm I felt. Not vindicated, not triumphant, just aligned. Alignment is quieter than revenge. It doesn't explode outward, it restructures inward. Daniel and I never returned to what we were. That chapter ended the moment he chose distance. But we did build something different. Professional respect without emotional illusion. His mother stopped measuring me through her son's lens. She began measuring outcomes instead. My parents adjusted their conversations, their posture, their expectations. They stopped protecting an image and started respecting reality. And that changed everything. The real twist was never the acquisition itself. It was the realization that I didn't need to fight for recognition. I only needed to stop allowing misrepresentation. Power doesn't need spectacle. It needs structure. 5 minutes after she said leaving me was the best decision he ever made, she didn't realize the narrative had already shifted. Not because I humiliated her, not because I confronted her publicly, but because I had built something that didn't require their validation. Strength isn't loud. It doesn't demand applause. It doesn't compete for spotlight at engagement dinners. It stands, it works, it prepares, and when the moment comes, it reveals itself